I never was angry with God. I never really blamed God. I didn't understand. I don't know why he allows certain things, but I just remember the pain being so great. And a lot of times I didn't feel him, but he was there. And looking back, he carried me through. And sometimes I did feel him, like the $20 bill. You know, there were moments that he would show himself, and he would send people. He would send the right people at the right time.
Welcome to Along the Way. I'm John Matarazzo, your host and fellow traveler. Thank you for joining me along my way as I try to become more like Jesus every day. For this episode, I'm joined by Max Davis, the author of the book Jesus, Josiah, and Me, along with many other titles. He was a guest on my Hope Today program back when I lived in Pittsburgh, and I was moved by his storytelling. I hope that you will be as well. I'll get to our conversation in just a moment, but as always, I want to thank you for listening to Along the Way. I hope that you like what you hear and that you subscribe. Please rate and review Along the Way on Apple Podcasts. All of my socials and contact links are in the show notes, and you can check out all of my episodes and join my email list at my website, alongtheway.media. I would love to hear from you. I also have a Patreon page if you want to help me to continue to put out these Along the Way episodes. If you'd like to become a Patreon supporter, simply go to patreon.com/alongtheway and select a level. The link to become a supporter is in my show notes. And now here's my Along the Way conversation with Max Davis. Well, Max Davis, it is great to have you on Along the Way. We connected recently when you were a guest on the Hope Today program, the TV show that I produce, and it is so good to be able to connect with you again and just to hear what God has done in your life, because you were talking about this book that you wrote about this autistic boy named Josiah, and you're a journalist and you have an inquisitive mind, and so you're not just taking things at face value, and so I want to hear your story of how you've become a Christian, how God has led you to be an author, and all that stuff, because there's a lot to learn from what we've talked about in the past, and I want to be able to share that with this Along the Way audience. So, Max, thank you so much for being on Along the Way with me.
Thank you. I'm really glad, excited to be here. It's really an amazing story. Yeah. and you got to understand, I'm just a guy, okay? So I'm just a country boy from Greenville Springs, Louisiana. Yeah. And what I have to do is I have to kind of tell you where I'm at now and take you back to where I came from.
Please do.
So at this point, and I'm only saying this like out of total humility, you have to understand I could care less if my name is on a book. In fact, I told God I would do a pen name because I didn't want anybody to know who I was. And God said, no, you have to use your name. So God has kind of brought me to this point where it's all about the journey and the process. And so really, and the message, that's what I love, the message of God's stories. But so at this point, I've written 38 books. And all by major publishers. I've been published by probably 10 of the biggest publishers. And I write books for other people, and I'm talking about collaborations. I do some ghostwriting, but mostly collaborations. And then I write my own stuff. So I write books for big platform people. Like I have a new book coming out in April called Take It Back with Tim Clinton. And Tim Clinton is the president of American Association of Christian Counselors. He's the co-host of James Dobson.
Oh, wow.
I've written 4 books with him and full collaborations. So writing books for these other people allows me to write my own books. And so they have their big platforms, and then, I write my own books. I wrote books for George Foreman. I wrote his book. I do several, high-named pastors. And well, anyway, the reason I'm saying that, so now, and my books have been in, they're all over the world. They're probably in 20 countries right now. We've seen, thousands of people saved through my books, okay? And the reason I'm telling you that is now let's go back to high school. Okay, so keep that in mind. So 1978, I drove a Gran Torino Sport, 1972 Gran Torino Sport, 351 Cleveland with the hood scoop. Did you see the movie Gran Torino?
I honestly haven't, no. But I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay, if you saw the movie Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood, that was the exact car that I had. I mean, it was a hot rod, and I had hair down to here, silk shirts, the whole thing. I was the most athletic in sports. I was on the homecoming court, football, sports. That's what I was all about. And I never read a book. I never read a book. And when I say I never read a book, I looked at books with pictures, Sports Illustrated, things like that. If you wanted to punish me, you could put me in the library. And the reason I'm telling you all this, I was kind of the guy on campus, okay? And drank beer, smoked pot, just your typical, teenager.
Okay. So you had no faith background growing up?
No, I did. Actually, I did have faith background. My parents, I grew up in a very strict religious background. And I mean, like my mom and my dad on both sides were pastors. I mean, my granddads on both sides were preachers. And they didn't believe in wearing makeup. They didn't believe in, men couldn't wear ties, women couldn't wear jewelry. Just very, very strict, I would call it legalistic background. I mean, I grew up saying God's going to punish you like probably every day. So I grew up thinking God was, if he loved me, he surely was disappointed in me. But I just kind of totally rebelled against that, even though I knew in my heart, that God was real. But I just didn't want any part of that. I was very rebellious. My grandmother told my mom that I was going up Fool's Hill, that I would come down one day. But anyway, so you kind of get this picture. And I was a really good football player. I'm telling you all this you need to know all this information. It's critical. If I'm going too fast,
you're good.
Tell me to slow down. So I was a very good athlete, and I was all state, and I was getting offers to play college football all over the country. And the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, offered me a scholarship. Now, this was going into my senior year. So I was a junior going into my senior year. Well, at that point, they took your grades from the 9th grade to the senior year. This was back in the 70s. And they had to your average had to come up with a 2.0 by your senior year. You had to have a 2.0 to get accepted into college on probation. Well, going into my senior year, I had a 1.5.
Oh, you got some picking up to do.
That's how bad my grades were, okay? Like English, I had D's. Typing, I think I typed like 1 word a minute. I mean, like 8 words a minute. I'm a little typer. Like, just, if they took a survey, who would be the least likely person in my high school to be a writer, an author? I mean, I would be pretty high up on that list. So anyway, so you get that picture?
Yeah.
So going into my senior year, I had to make almost straight A's to pull my overall GPA up to a 2.0. At the end of my junior year, I got radically saved. I mean, I got radically saved and filled with the Holy Spirit. And it was so crazy that everybody in the school knew. Wow. So when I came to school, they were all like, "Did you hear about Max Davis?"
So how did you meet Jesus then?
Well, I wrote a book called "When Jesus Was a Green-Eyed Brunette."
Okay. And
actually, the woman that is my wife now led me to the Lord.
Okay.
And she was the green-eyed brunette, which I'm kind of giving that away right now. That's a very good book, by the way. It's gotten a lot of. It was published by Worthy, but so I got radically saved. And you talk about charismatic. At that time, they didn't have a lot of charismatic churches, and they had one church that was charismatic. But at that time, it was a big deal because all these people were coming out of the traditional churches and going to these charismatic churches. Well, I got saved in a charismatic church. And very balanced teaching. I mean, really solid teaching. But the news media came out to do a news thing. And when they did, I was worshiping God like this on the front row. And the news got it.
Okay.
And it was on It was on the 10 o'clock news. So pretty much everybody at school knew, that I had gotten saved. And we're talking about a school of 1,200 people. I'm rambling a little bit.
That's all right.
So anyway, I go to school, totally radically saved. And really kind of became like a school evangelist. And, would tote my Bible to school. We started a school Bible study and just really, we wound up seeing, I bet you we had 50 people come to our Bible study every morning. And so really, I just became full of Jesus, and Jesus became everything to me. And I would go on these long walks with the Lord. I live by a river that, I could walk with hundreds and hundreds of acres. And every week I would go on these long 3 or 4 hour walks with God. I'd just take my Bible and I would just spend hours and hours and hours with God. And I just thought that was normal. I really did. And you read some of that in Jesus, Josiah, and Me. So I really, from a very young age, high school, began to learn how to fellowship and talk and walk with God. Well, one day, and it's a true story, I'm not exaggerating, okay? I hate exaggeration. And you got to realize, at this point, I don't really know anything. I'm just so soaking up God and Jesus and Christian brothers and sisters. So I'm driving down the road one night in my Gran Torino Sport car, and it's just me in the car. And it's actually a Sunday night, and I'm going to church. At that time, I went Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday. I was always there. I'm driving down the road, and John, I hear an audible voice. Now, I've only heard the audible voice of God twice. And by the way, I've met a lot of other people that have heard the audible voice of God. Eric Metaskis, he heard the audible voice of God, very similar to me. Anyway, I hear the audible voice of God, and it said, "You're going to write books, and they're going to go all over the world." If I'm lying, I'm dying. That's what it said. And now, whether you would have heard it, whether it was in my heart, I don't know. All I know is I heard it. I heard the voice. And I literally looked around the car and I went, whoa, where did that come from? Because I knew it didn't come from me, because that was the last thing on my mind. Like, I would never have thought that I would be an author. Never. It just did not come from me. And that's one of the reasons I knew it was God, because it didn't come from me. And so the experience was so life transforming, because I'm like literally, where did that come from? That voice. It just, you're going to write books. They're going to go all over the world. It was that plain. Well, at that point, I was, like I said, about to go to college on a football scholarship. And, what
position did you play?
I ran a 4.4 in the 40, and I played wide receiver in college. And in high school, I played running back and defensive back. And when I got to college, they moved me to wide receiver and a little bit of defensive back. But if you ever saw, I'm trying to think, someone in the NFL, did you see, the little boy that played for Clemson? I think, I was like 180 pounds. You couldn't hurt me. I was one of those little, like Edelman kind of guy. So what you have to understand is, my dad, from the time I was born, he wanted me to play football. So we played 17 years of football. Okay. So now, I'm reaching my goal that my dad's dream was for me to play college football. So I go to my dad, kind of get this picture. I'm 18 years old, have this football scholarship. And I go to my dad and I said, "Dad, God's called me to be a writer." That's probably the last thing a dad. And at that point, you're talking 1979. I had no idea how you make a living as a writer. I didn't know anything. All I know is I heard a voice that said, "I'm going to write books." And I knew it was God. And so my daddy, and this is one of the big times in his life that he really came through. He could have shamed me at that point. He could have said, man, you're crazy. It's just a phase. But you know what Daddy did? He said, you know what, son? He says, you got the scholarship to play football. You played all your life. He said, why don't you take the scholarship? And after 4 years, if you still believe God's called you to be a writer, then I'll pay your way to seminary.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. So I decided, that would be the best route. But instead of majoring, I was going to major in like physical therapy or coaching or something like that. I wound up majoring in journalism.
Okay.
I said, you know what? If God's called me to be a writer, well, then I'm going to take journalism. And Ole Miss has one of the top journalism schools in the nation at that time. I think they still do. And I mean, I was bold. I went directly to the dean of journalism and I said, God's called me to be a writer. And he's like, great. Let's help you accomplish that.
Oh, wow.
And what happened was when the Holy Spirit came into me and God spoke to me that I was going to be a writer, I was filled with this just incredible hunger to learn. And by the time I graduated, I can't say the whole time, but by the time I graduated, I was a perfect 4.0. At that time, you could only go to 4.0. And I was on the dean's list.
Wow.
So God just kind of turned me around. When I was in high school, I just didn't care, I didn't think I could learn. I didn't care. But when the Holy Spirit came in me and God gave me that God dream, he began to light a fire in me. And so much happened in journalism. And now, looking back, after I graduated from Ole Miss, I went to Oral Roberts University to get a degree in theology. And because I wanted to combine the theology with the journalism. But over the years, it's the journalism that has really been the foundation of a lot of my writing.
Okay.
And it's the journalism that actually challenged my faith because I was very skeptical. But it was also the journalism that confirmed my faith. And like right now, I mean, I just, like I told you over the phone, give me any atheist for a day. And at the end of the day, he's got to say either I'm lying or God's real. And the truth is, he's real. The evidence is there. It's just people have to want it. And a lot of people don't want the evidence.
Yeah.
So I began to see God's hand through this whole process. But anyway, I'm still going. I want to kind of let you catch your breath.
I'm enjoying hearing you talk about how God has brought you through that. I mean, I was already a Christian whenever I was growing up, but I was not a very good student until my junior year of high school. And then all of a sudden I had some vision, I had some direction for my life, even though at that point it was just an inkling of that, but at least God used that to turn me around when it came to just my studies. And so just to hear that happened with you too, in a radical way, is pretty remarkable. So you graduated from journalism at Ole Miss, but you now kind of want to jump ahead to show me something that God revealed to you through another book that you wrote.
Okay, so I was designing my book cover and writing my book. Look at this.
Wow.
When I was in high school. Okay. So this is after God spoke to me. So how many high school seniors do you know are writing a book because they believe they heard, God? And we're talking, 40 years ago. So what I was going to tell you about the book, Jesus, Josiah, and Me, is where I had, that supernatural encounter with Josiah, where he in Minnesota had prophetic words for me in Louisiana. He had a prophetic word about God speaking to me in high school.
Okay.
So he actually said what God told me, what God spoke to me audibly.
He gave this word to you before he met you?
Yeah, he didn't even know anything.
Yeah.
So
you've had some really unique experiences where God has done some miraculous things. And we'll talk about Josiah and how your relationship with him has really been pretty pivotal in your life recently.
So you have to understand. So now we're 5 years after God spoke to me. And I go to Oral Roberts University, moved to Tulsa. And at that time, I'm married. And so while I'm at ORU in Tulsa, I'm married and have 2 children. And my wife at that time, I can tell you the whole story. She was a nurse actually at the City of Faith Hospital. And so we spent a lot of time in Tulsa, and I wound up being part of a church and, being on staff and getting my master's degree. And at the whole time, God has called me to be a writer, but nothing has happened. You have to understand,
okay.
Nothing has happened. I'm still working, in college. And after I graduate, I'm thinking, okay, now I got a master's degree. I've got a journalism degree, but I still don't have any books. I've still not written any books, even though God's developing my craft. And I have no idea. I have no idea how I'm going to get published. I don't even know, all I know is I'm pursuing this.
Yeah.
Wound up working for UPS.
Okay.
As a truck driver. So I'm working you get this picture, I'm working at UPS as a truck driver. And, making good money. My wife is making money as a nurse. We bought a house, had 2 kids. I'm living in Tulsa, but yet I still have this dream that God audibly spoke to me that I'm going to be a writer. And I have no clue how it's going to happen other than God spoke it. And so, when I drive a truck with UPS, I've got my notepad, my notebook. I'm always writing, just always writing, always letting God develop my craft. Well, one night, so I've been in Tulsa probably 4 or 5 years now. And one night I had a dream. I had a prophetic dream. And again, you got to understand, I'm very skeptical when it comes to things like this.
Okay.
I'm telling you exactly what happened and how it was confirmed. So I had this dream, and in the dream, I was pastoring a church in Lawrence, Kansas. Well, number one, I'd never been to Lawrence, Kansas. Number 2, to say I didn't know there was a Lawrence, Kansas would be like, yeah, I knew there was a Lawrence, Kansas, probably like I knew there was, Reno, Nevada or something. It was just another city.
So you were vaguely aware of it, but not personally aware of it.
I knew there was a Lawrence, Kansas, but there was no connection. I had no connection with a Lawrence, Kansas. And in this dream, I'm pastoring a church in Lawrence, Kansas. And I saw the church. It was a storefront. I'm preaching. And above it said Lawrence Christian Fellowship. And it was just very, very vivid. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I told my wife, I said, man, I had this dream that I was pastoring in Lawrence, Kansas. And we got up and we actually got an atlas and we looked at Lawrence, Kansas and went, wow, there it is. And it was three hours north of Tulsa. So anyway, the following Monday, I called my pastor to my house for breakfast. And I told him, I said, Pastor, I had a dream that I was pastoring in Lawrence, Kansas. I said, do you think God's, speaking to me to move to Lawrence, Kansas to start a church? He says, no. He said, time will tell. But he said, I do want to get a church started in Kansas City. I said, no, it's not Kansas City. It was Lawrence, Kansas. Well, are you familiar with Open Bible Standard Churches, Open Bible Fellowships?
I think so.
They're kind of like the Assemblies of God.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
They're the sister denomination of the Assemblies of God. Well, Pastor Joel was superintendent over the Midwest division. So on Monday, I told him about my dream. On Wednesday, he got a letter from a church that said, Pastor, we're looking for a pastor. Our church wants to join the Open Bible Fellowship denomination. And we also are looking for a pastor. Do you know anyone that might be interested? And by the way, we're in Lawrence, Kansas.
No way. That's crazy.
Yeah, so that was on Wednesday. So I shared with him on Monday.
Wow.
Well, long story short, within 30 days, I was in Lawrence, Kansas, pastoring a church.
Wow.
And it's so funny because I tore a rotator cuff in my arm, and UPS said I could either go into management or they could pay me a settlement. And within 30 days, they paid me a settlement. We paid off all our debts. We go to Lawrence, Kansas. We're pastoring this church that is freakishly similar to what I saw in my dream. It was just crazy. And we actually, we went up there and visited it. We didn't just take it blindly.
Right.
But God specifically was guiding our directions. And this is where the story gets really crazy. So, I'm going to Lawrence, Kansas. Mm-hmm. Now remember, God spoke to me to be a writer. And now I'm pastoring this church in Kansas. And with that call and with that dream, I'm thinking, we're going to grow the biggest church in the world. We're going to be Lawrence Christian World Outreach. Mm-hmm. And we did. I mean, the church really began to grow. And I think someone said it was one of the fastest growing churches in Kansas. Maybe that was in the Open Bible denomination. But we were at the University of Kansas, and a lot of, young people were coming. Well, I have a son that was born totally deaf, and that created some unique challenges. But so I guess I was there 2 or 3 years, and I was still writing and getting better, and I would use the congregation as guinea pigs to my writing. Well, anyway, I'm trying to say this as fast as I can. I came home one day and my wife was gone. She was gone. She left me. I was just totally blindsided. Oh, wow. And here, not the green-eyed brunette.
Okay.
You have to read the green-eyed brunette story.
Okay.
And so you have to understand the church was exploding in growth. I was very driven. I was a driven pastor. Like I was all about, we're growing this great church. And I saw things in my family that I thought, there's some problems, but, God's going to take care of it.
Sure.
But there was a lot of issues. And I remember an older lady came up to me, a little old lady. She was in her 80s. She says, when God gave you this miraculous call, you need to be careful because it's not going to be easy. And basically what she said. So she kind of had this prophetic insight. But back then we didn't have cell phones and all of that. And this particular Sunday, I went to church and my wife stayed home. And I actually took the kids. Well, when I came home, she was gone. And I just thought she, and this was after 10 years of marriage.
Oh, wow. So you're how old?
At this point, I am 32.
Okay.
32. And I was senior pastor. It's just crazy what I look back. And, she was gone all day. And I thought, she went to the store or something. But then after, 8 hours, I started searching for her. And finally, at 6 o'clock, the deacons of my church, came to my church and came to my door. And I said, have you seen, and they said, yes. And she left you. She's leaving you. And
so she didn't leave a note or anything. She just.
No.
Wow.
No, the elders told me. Well, anyway, a lot came out later. But the point is, within 60 days, I lost everything.
Wow.
Like I lost everything.
Wow.
And I lost my home, lost my kids, lost my church. They didn't want me to resign. The church people did not want me to resign. But the denomination wanted me to resign because they felt like I needed to focus on the marriage. And I was convinced that we were going to get back together. It was like, there's no way this is happening. It was just, I was devastated. I tell people, for a year, I couldn't even set foot in the church. My prayer was, God, I just cried out to God. And, I would be in the fetal position like a baby. I mean, it was devastating. But James Dobson said, these are 10 things not to do when your spouse leaves you. And I did every time, 10 of those. And so basically, Kansas had a no-fault divorce. And within 60 days, I was divorced. But she stayed in Kansas, and I didn't want to leave my kids. Mm-hmm. And so I couldn't find work. I wound up homeless. I wound up living in my car.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Max.
I lived in my car for a while, and the policeman knocking on my window, waking me up. And I would stay with people. You know how you would stay with people for a while. And then, it's time to move on. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I lived, for a year. I was just crazy. But I never was mad at God. And I cried out to God. And I tell people sometimes the pain was so bad that I would have to pull the car off the side of the road and just cry out to God. And that was my prayers. Oh, God. And I continued these long walks with God. And I tell people losing everything was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I remember one day, and I tell the story in one of my books. So you have to understand, I had no money.
Okay? Right, because you were a pastor. I mean, when you're going through something like that and you can't pastor, that's really tough.
And I had people that helped me. And I had, my dad, he sent me some money, my mom and in Louisiana. But I had no money.
Right. Okay?
I couldn't even afford an apartment. And so I had my kids. I was getting my kids, but this one particular day, it was cold. And I had a 13-year-old Toyota Celica that was rusting that I kept. And I gave my ex everything. I gave her the house. I gave her the cars. I gave her the good car because I thought we were going to get back together.
Right.
And I kept the old. So anyway, I'm living out of this 13-year-old Toyota Celica. So anyway, I'm out of gas. I'm hungry. I don't have any money. And I'm telling you, I don't have any money. So I'm walking down the street in Lawrence, Kansas, Massachusetts Street. And I cried out to God. And I kid you not, I said, God, your word says that you'll provide. And I said, I need money. I need money for gas and food right now. And I'm just asking you to provide for me. And I kid you not, John, I looked down at my feet. Like I opened my eyes and I looked down at my feet. And there was a $20 bill right there at my foot. And I reached down and I picked up a $20 bill. It's the only time in my life I've ever found a $20 bill. And back then, that was much more than now. $20 bill was probably like $40 back then, or $100. I was able to get gas and get food. But what God showed me was that he knew I was there. And he was real. He was alive. And even though I was going through this incredibly painful situation, God was there. And I tell people that at that point, my life kind of changed and I began to live what I call desperate dependence. And it's one thing to say it's one thing to say you're dependent on God. It's another thing when God is all you have. And I began to live every day on desperate dependence with God. And I actually wrote a book called Desperate Dependence that came out of it. And that's the one at the 700 Club. But I began to live daily and really look to God as my source. I don't know if you're familiar with Reese Howell.
Yeah, the intercessor.
You've read about Reese. So he kind of lived that where he understood that God was really his source. And God actually had him pray money in for that college. And that's how I live my life every day. Like, God, you are my source. If you don't come through, I'm dead meat. And he began to rebuild my life little by little. But what happened was, as I was putting things back in my life, I tell people my life was like a kid that spilled crayons all over. And he's on the floor scratching for some unbroken crayon to put back in his box. That was me. But what I found out, what I was putting back in my box, were things that I really understood about God and what really meant. So my theology, my foundation was getting a lot stronger through this pain, and God was kind of carrying me through. But my ex, she didn't come back. She had affairs with a couple of people. Found out she was bipolar. She tried to commit suicide. And there were a lot of issues that, being a pastor's wife kind of brought to the surface. And come to find out she was abused by her dad sexually, all these things. And actually, we have reconciliation now. She loves my wife. So God has brought healing, but the marriage wasn't healed.
Right.
And but God began rebuilding my life. But what you have to understand is everything in me died. All my dreams die.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I'm like, how am I going to be a writer? I can't be a pastor. I can't be a writer. I was selling vacuum cleaners.
Okay.
And I couldn't give them away. So anyway, so now I'm kind of building this story. So now God starts this healing process in me. And she sold the house, moved to Louisiana, which was a good thing. So I wound up moving to Louisiana to be close to my kids, and I lived with my parents.
Okay.
So here I am, mid-30s, living with my parents, total failure. And I'm the guy with all the dreams that they, So I was humbled. I tell people, you can't offend me because I've been offended so much. I've been humbled. But God began this process in me, and I'll get to the good part. And I remember coming to a point where I remember getting on my knees and saying, God, I don't care if I push a broom the rest of my life. I just want to serve you and be a good dad. And it was kind of a pivotal point. And I just felt the Holy Spirit just release me. And he said, she's not coming back. It's over. And you're released. And just be, who I called you to be. And this is after 2 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so when that happened, I just experienced this incredible healing. And I'm like, man, now I could be a pastor. Boy, after coming through this, I could really, but I'm like, who's gonna hire me? And, what am I going to do? Well, I called my professor, one of my professors at ORU, Dr. Watney. And I said, what do I do for my living? I don't know what to do to make money. I'm okay now. And he goes, find where your gifts are and delegate what you're not good to other people. And so I realized I could talk and write. Those are the only two things I really knew how to do. And I tried selling insurance and cars and all that stuff.
That's not fun.
But I knew I could write and I knew I could talk. But I'm like, nobody's going to publish me. So I started my own publishing company. And I went around to my friends and neighbors and raised money. I raised $60,000. And you got to understand, we didn't have internet. I know. We didn't have internet. We didn't have any of that stuff. This was early 90s. And I wrote a little book called Never Stick Your Tongue Out at Mama and Other Life Transforming Revelations. You probably weren't even born. How old are you?
I'm 36. I was born in 85.
36. Okay, so you would have been 10 years old. So this was 1995. So Robert Fulghum had written a New York Times bestseller called All I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And that book was a New York Times bestseller. And then, I don't know if you remember the Chicken Soup for the Soul series.
Yeah.
So those were biggies.
Okay.
Well, when I did Never Stick Your Tongue Out at Mama and Other Life Transforming Revelations, I knew it was a funny title. But the stories in the book were all about my pain and everything that I went through. And I would tell these funny Southern stories mixed with, something that makes you cry.
Right.
But I didn't want it to be too Christian. At that point, I wanted the Christian message, but I didn't want it to look all churchy. and wound up self-publishing that book. And I took the Chicken Soup model, how they sold their books. Wound up selling 13,000 copies.
Okay.
Just in the Louisiana, Baton Rouge area. And I mean, I was making money. I mean, I had a full-fledged business. And then I came home one day, and there was a message from an agent in New York, big New York agent. She was one of the top agents. She said, "I've heard about your book. Can you come to New York City? I have several major publishers that are interested in buying it."
Wow.
So I said, "Yeah." So I fly to New York City. You got to realize, I'm this guy from Greenwood. I'm just a country boy. And here I am in New York City, meeting with Simon & Schuster, Bantam, Doubleday, Penham, all these biggies.
Right.
And now I'm in Times Square, the Virgin Record building, and I'm up, and I'm literally meeting with the board of the largest publishers in the world.
Wow.
It's Random House now, but back then it was Bantam, Doubleday.
Okay. Right.
And so, I'm in there with the board, and Carissa Hayes, who's the marketing director, and you got to get this picture. I'm looking out over New York City and the skyline. And it's just like in the movies. And she says, "Do you have to believe in God and Jesus for this to work?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And so she says, "Okay." So they signed me with this huge book deal. I got 10 times what a normal author gets.
Wow.
And they put me on a tour all over the United States. In Barnes and Nobles, they sent me all over. TV, did a half-page ad in USA Today magazine. And it just really changed my life.
Yeah, I'll say.
And basically, they paid me to go to Barnes and Nobles all over the country and preach the gospel. Because they would set me up at this podium, and people would come, and I would talk, and then do the book signing. And at one of my book signings, we had over 400 people come.
Oh my gosh.
But they would send me city to city and do media tours, and they did that back then.
Yeah.
So after I signed that book deal, I'm getting on the elevator, and I'm coming down, and the Holy Spirit speaks to me and said, "This is what I spoke to you back in high school. When I told you you were going to be a writer and your books were going to go all over the world. You're starting to see the fulfillment of that." And this was 15 years later. And of course, that was the beginning, because I couldn't have orchestrated any of this, But what's interesting about the dream that I had about Lawrence, Kansas. So we're going to go back to that dream. There was a part of the dream that I didn't tell you. And the dream was I was naked. So I was preaching in the church, but I was naked. And I looked down at myself, and I was very embarrassed, and I covered myself. Well, over the years, I just thought that was, just a quirky part of the dream.
Sure.
But after God so I felt like I was going to Lawrence, Kansas to grow a great church. But God knew I was going to be going to Lawrence, Kansas, and I was going to be stripped of everything, and it was going to be an incredibly painful situation. The hope in the story is that even though I went through that, God was still working. He still called me back in high school, and going through that didn't affect, it was actually part of the calling. If I wouldn't have gone through that, my writings wouldn't have the meaning that they have.
Sure, yeah.
Now, God hates divorce. I would never counsel anybody. But divorce happens, and bad things happen. And God is able to carry us through and still work his plan in our life. And so that was the beginning of my career as a writer. And of course, there's a whole other, once you get to that point, then it starts a whole nother journey.
Right.
Because every book is a faith thing.
Yeah. So you've written 38 books, you said.
38 books at this point. And I'm under contract right now for 3 more.
3 more. Wow.
Yeah, I'm writing 2 at one time right now.
How do you keep that straight?
it's a gift. As long as I'm writing what is in my lane.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have to write a certain type of book.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm writing one for Tim Clinton's son, Zach. When I say writing for, it's a collaboration. We're both writing.
Yeah.
And then I'm writing one for a guy called the Bear Man. You need to have him on your show.
Okay.
So he's a billionaire with a B.
Oh, wow.
And he goes up to Canada to do bow hunting.
Okay.
For moose. And he gets attacked by a grizzly bear. And he literally gets saved while he's dying.
Oh my gosh.
He thinks he's dying. It's an incredible story.
You're going to have to connect me with him for sure.
I'll give you his information.
Okay.
But anyway, so that's kind of my story, is that God spoke to me in high school, but yet he supernaturally was, working through all of this pain.
Yeah. So you said something earlier that I want to make sure that I ask about this, because you said that you can, as a journalist, as somebody that's you know how to investigate, you know how to really explain the gospel. And you kind of put out this challenge that you could take an atheist and explain the gospel to them in a way that they would either have to say that Jesus is real or that you're lying. And they would have to make some big claims on that. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I didn't actually say the gospel.
Okay.
I said I could either God is real or I'm lying. But it all comes back to the gospel.
Right.
And God's stories are a dinner bell for the gospel. Mm-hmm. I've had atheists in my office hold their head and go, "Stop, I can't take anymore." Because I've shown them stuff that they look at and they go, "Whoa."
So what are some of those things that you like to show to people to help them?
So for one, this is in my book, The Insanity of Unbelief. So her name is Marilyn Ford. And Marilyn Ford was blind. And she lost her eyesight through, you'll love the story. Mm-hmm. She lost her eyesight when she was a teenager. And she goes to Mayo Clinic. So we're talking Mayo Clinic here. Mm-hmm. We're not talking Bob's. Yeah. So she goes to Mayo Clinic and they diagnose her with juvenile macular degeneration. Oh, wow. And they tell her, "You will never see again. Go home and learn to live with it." Okay? So I actually got the actual diagnosis from Mayo Clinic. I got the doctor's slip. So I got all of that. All right? So she winds up for 13 years, completely loses her eyesight, can't see anything. And she goes to Tennessee Temple University. Mm-hmm. She's the first blind student ever to go to Tennessee Temple University. I have records of her going to Tennessee Temple. So we know that she went to Tennessee Temple as a blind person. Mm-hmm. Never took a note. It was all with audio. Sure. She was the only student that they allowed to record the lectures. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so she gets married to a man named A.C. Ford. She never saw his face. She could never see his face. And he's a pastor, and she's a pastor's wife, but she's blind. They moved to a little town in North Louisiana and become the pastor. And she continues, she's completely blind, has a baby named Sharon, can't see her, never saw her. Well, anyway, it's getting pretty stressful being blind and being a pastor's wife. Mm-hmm. And, she had little braille all over her house, So so she winds up leaving her home and going to the Arkansas School for the Blind. Okay. Because the church that they pastored was right on the border of Arkansas and Louisiana. So she goes to the Arkansas School for the Blind. I get the record from that school. Mm-hmm. I get her blind test. So I have it. It's in the book. You don't go to the Arkansas School for the Blind if you can see. Right. You understand? You have to be blind. So I'm telling you all this because these are the things that, you have to prove these little things. And I had pictures of her from the School for the Blind walking with a cane, reading Braille, the whole thing. So the bottom line is this woman is blind. I got the records to prove it. All right. So on her husband's birthday one night, they went to a party. They drove home and they got in bed. They were tired, and it was probably about 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And she gets in the bed. She lays in the bed. AC, and you have to understand, I went to Memphis and I interviewed these people personally.
Okay.
I interviewed her husband and her. And they're Baptists at this point. They're not even charismatic. They don't even believe in healing like we did. Even though for 13 years she prayed and believed God.
Right.
But nothing ever happened. So anyway, she's laying there on the bed. He falls on his knees. He puts his hand over her chest. And this is all he prays, John. This is all he prays. He says, God, I know you heal blind people when you were on this earth. I ask right now that you heal my wife's eyes. That's it. 30-second prayer. No hoopla, no jumping up and down, no speaking in tongues, just that. She opens her eyes, John, 20/20 vision.
Oh my gosh.
We're talking perfect vision. You could have her on your show. I could put her, she'd be a great one. And 20/20 vision. And she's like, oh my gosh, she hasn't seen for 15 years. And so when I interviewed her, I said, Marilyn, when AC began to pray for you, what did you see? She says, I couldn't see anything. She said, nothing. Blind, black, haze. She said, that's all I saw. And that's all I'd ever seen for, 15 years. So you're telling me, Marilyn, when he began to pray that you were blind? Yes, sir, I was blind. 30 seconds later, she opened her eyes. I said, why'd you open your eyes? If you're blind, why'd you close your eyes? She said, because I was trained at the blind school. When somebody prays, you close their eyes. And so I just kind of closed my eyes. So he says, 30-second prayer. She opens her eyes, completely healed.
Wow.
Like completely.
Wow.
All right, so story gets better.
Gets better than that?
So,
wow. I can't wait.
Yeah. So they're like going crazy. Like she's running around the house. She sees her husband for the first time. She's like, oh, you're not as handsome as I. She sees herself and she sees her daughter, the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
Over 1,000 people came to their house from all different denominations. Well, anyway, she goes to the doctor. She goes to the eye doctor that week. The eye doctor examines her eyes. He says, I don't know what you're seeing with. He says, because you still have macular degeneration. He says, scar tissue is still all in your eyes. But he said, it's obvious that you read my charts because you read them all and you see 20/20. He says, I don't understand it. You can see, but you still have the scar tissue.
Wow.
John, I've known this. I wrote her book. I wrote the book. It came out in 2012, so I interviewed her in 2010. She's been a good friend of mine. She's in her 70s. She might be 80 now, 78. She sees better than me. She doesn't even wear glasses.
Wow.
She still doesn't wear glasses.
Wow.
Now, so if you're an atheist, this is what I tell an atheist. What do you do with that? I mean, it's just like the Saints won the Super Bowl in 2009. You can go to the record. This woman was blind. Her husband prayed, and she's healed. And I got all the records to prove it.
Wow.
So a person has to look at that story and go, okay, either I choose to believe it or I don't. But it happened.
Wow. That's remarkable.
And see, with Jesus, they chose not to believe. Jesus would do a miracle in front of them, and it says many didn't believe.
So your book, The Insanity of Unbelief, is all stories like that. Is that correct?
No. It has parts of stories like that.
Okay.
But actually, The Insanity of Unbelief has many more aspects. I mean, it deals with the miraculous, but it also deals with apologetics.
Okay.
It's kind of like a lot of apologetics don't deal with the miraculous.
Sure. Right.
So we kind of pull it all together.
Bridge that gap. That's good. I definitely want to make sure I get that.
But even that story, I mean, I have stories that blow that one out the water. You know, but that's kind of one of my go-tos.
That's a good one, though. And if you got others that blow that out of the water, we're going to have to, figure out another time to talk about that too. But I before we go any further, I want to talk about the book that you wrote that you were talking about on the show Hope Today, the Jesus, Josiah, and Me. You had an opportunity to get to know this very special autistic boy, Josiah, and God really speaks to him in remarkable ways, and that has impacted your life in a great way. Can you just tell me a little bit about that and why you felt the need to write that book and to put it in print?
Well, to say it impacted my life is an understatement. It totally changed my life. So from 2015 to 2018, so I received, so Josiah at that time, he was 9.5 years old. He's completely autistic, nonverbal.
Okay.
And he's so locked up. It's just really bad. But he speaks by typing one finger into an iPad. This is not connected to the internet. Sometimes it's a laminated board, and sometimes it's actually a keypad that he types in. And that's how he talks, one sentence, one letter at a time. And his mother takes his words and, writes them out. Well, he has visitations from heaven, and Jesus has appeared to him. The Holy Spirit speaks to him. And he'll be typing something like, "Mom, let's go to the movies," or "Mom, this is what I did at school." And then all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit will just take over his brain and start dictating. So I received over 20 pages of prophetic word from Josiah, 20 pages, single-spaced, of prophetic word to me, Max Davis, in Louisiana. And he was in Minnesota. I never met him. Never knew him. He didn't even know me. And the words were so specific and so detailed, kind of like the lady with the blind. I mean, either you have to look at it and you go, either this is God or I'm lying. But I'm not lying. I got witnesses.
Right.
It's just too specific. And so from 2015 to 2018 is when I received those words. And then in 2018, I actually went up there and visited him in person, after he had all these words that changed my life. And so, I don't know, there was just so many incredible words.
What's one of those words that changed your life? I know you mentioned something about he gave you a word that confirmed something that God spoke to you when you were in high school, that there's no way that he would have known.
So the majority of the words revolved around my prayer life.
Okay.
And I told you earlier that I've always spent time in prayer.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. All right, so we were building a house. Did I tell you the story?
No.
About the house?
Tell me.
So I live on 40 acres. And at this time, we had torn down an old house that we lived in. We lived in a really old house, and we tore it down. While we were building the new one, we lived in a trailer in the woods while they were building our house. Well, I didn't have an office. So I would pray. I prayed in the woods at night. I went to the Mississippi Gulf Coast and prayed. I went to all these different prayer places. And after I prayed, I would get a word from Josiah that I had been praying in that place.
Oh, wow.
So one of the times when I want to try to explain this right. So when the house that was under construction, we got the sheetrock in and the plywood floors, no electricity and no windows. It was just I started praying in the house at night.
Okay.
So I would leave my truck, and you got to realize I never did this before. So I'd never done this in my whole life. So at about 8 o'clock, I would get a little headlight, a little flashlight, and I would leave my trailer, and I would come to this house, the house under construction. And I went in a room, and I put the little headlight on the wall, and I would walk around in circles, and I cried out to God every night in that house, in the construction house. It became my prayer spot.
Yeah.
And I'd never done it before. After about a week of praying in that house, I got a word from Josiah. Sovereign word. Out of the blue. It said, Mama, Pop, I have to read it to you. It said, the loud big house is popping to Papa. Max nightly Papas. Joy is his prayers to Papa in the house, the loud house. You know, he's talking about the house. Yeah, that's what he says. He says, a couple of weeks into my praying at the house, I received a sovereign message from Josiah. And this is what it said. Pop, pop, pop. Lots of popping, Mom. The loud popping is loud to my ears. Past loud popping was nails. Talking about the nail guns, which is the construction. He says, but popping now is Papa, Papa, Papa. Max nightly Papas. The loud big house is popping to Papa. Max nightly Papas. Joy is prayers to Papa in his loud, loud house. So he saw me praying in the house at night.
Yeah.
And there's way more to it that I haven't. You know.
So God was showing him that you were in this house praying every night.
Yeah.
And God showed him that. And
I had only been doing it for a week.
Wow.
It's not like I've been doing it my whole life.
Right.
And then when I prayed in the woods, I got one about that. And when I prayed in the motel room, I got one about that. Where he actually said I was in the motel room praying.
Wow.
So what do you do with that?
I don't know. How have you dealt with that?
Well, it's the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's God letting, like Nathaniel.
Okay, right.
When he was praying under the fig tree, you know, Jesus says, I saw you when you were under the fig tree. And he goes, you're the Son of God. And you go, what? That sounds a little radical. But then when you do research, you found out that Spurgeon and a lot of scholars believe that Nathaniel was praying and crying out to God under the fig tree. That's why when Jesus said, I saw you under the fig tree, he knew he had to be God, because Nathaniel knew there was no way anybody could see him.
Right.
But God. And so this is kind of, you know, all these different places. It's God letting me know that he sees me praying, that he's fully present.
Yeah.
Now, why did it happen to me? And I write this in the book. Maybe because I'm a journalist and I would get the story out. It's certainly not because I'm some great, man of God. But the truth is God is present whether we feel it or not.
That is so true, Max.
But this story just confirms that.
It has to be God. It has to be. The whole purpose of this podcast is I'm taking people along the journey of life with me. You know, basically, the story of the disciples walking on the road to Emmaus. Here comes this traveler with them, and they end up talking with him, and then they finally get to the destination, and then it's actually Jesus in disguise, as everybody should know.
Right.
They invite him to come in to the house, and then he sits down at the table with them. He blesses the food and breaks the bread. Their eyes are opened. They realize that it's Jesus, and then poof, he's gone. You know, what you were just talking about, Max, is that you know that God sees you. You know that God has, shown things to you to let you know that he sees you. And, the disciples in that case, they turned to each other in Luke 24:32 and said, weren't our hearts burning within us along the way as he was revealing the scriptures to us? I don't want to miss those moments where our hearts are burning, where my heart is burning in my journey, because I'm too busy to pay attention to what Jesus is trying to do in my life. So Max, what's a time in your story, in your life, in your journey with the Lord that you can say, you know what, Jesus was with me and my heart was burning during that time, but I didn't see it then, but I see it now?
You're talking 40 years.
I know.
Like I tell people, for 2 years, I couldn't go to church. It was just too painful. And I just, my prayers were tears, really. I just cried out to God. But I always walked with God. I never was angry with God. I never really blamed God. I didn't understand. I don't know why he allows certain things. But I just remember the pain being so great. And a lot of times I didn't feel him, but he was there. And looking back, he carried me through. And sometimes I did feel him, like the $20 bill.
Right.
There were moments that he would show himself. And he would send people. He would send the right people at the right time. And then, after that, I dealt with my son who's deaf, and I raised him because I wound up getting my kids, which all serve the Lord now, by the way.
Amen.
They all
Praise
love
the Lord for that.
But raising a son that's completely deaf was incredibly painful for me. And oh my gosh, I can't tell you the tears that I've cried for him. And you talk about God stories. Oh my gosh, God has come through for my son over and over again, but he didn't heal him. But here's the deal. My son had a vision of Jesus. Jesus appeared to my son and spoke to him in sign language.
Wow.
Yeah, it's in one of my books. And it changed his whole life. He was a druggie. He had gone to jail. And after that, he went and got baptized in our pond. He's been serving God ever since.
Wow.
But he said he was sitting on his back porch, and he was just sitting there and drinking a beer, and he said everything disappeared. And all of a sudden he saw Jesus, and Jesus signed to him, said, I see you. I'm gathering people for a new world. Told him all this stuff that we'd never told him. And he can't, he's profoundly deaf. He's completely deaf. So he can't really read the Bible like we can.
Sure.
And he had all of these amazing insights. And he said, Jesus told me to put my head in the water. In other words, be baptized. But that's how he said it.
Wow.
But I asked him, I said, were you thinking it? He goes, no, I saw. I said, was it in your mind? He says, no, I saw.
Wow.
And he goes, I asked God again and again. And he said, nope, one time.
Wow.
But I know my son is telling the truth. And it radically changed his life.
Wow.
And you pray for healing, and then Jesus speaks sign language to him. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. But Jesus does speak to us in ways that we can understand, and he speaks to us in our heart language. And one of the kind of the follow-up questions that I always like to ask, Max, you talked about different stages of your life and how you went through those very tough years where you were homeless and your wife left you and all that stuff. If there is a time period in your life that you could go back to with the Max, with the wisdom and knowledge that you have from today, if you could today go back into the past and talk with young Max and give yourself some advice, what is going on in that scene that you would want to tell yourself something, and what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, so I could get really personal. Because I look back and I have to be careful how I say this. I don't like the person I used to be. I'm comfortable in my skin where I am now, but I look back. I'm talking about after I'm a Christian. I'm not talking about before I'm a Christian.
Sure.
I'm talking about after I was a pastor and all that. I just look back at some of the things, and I don't like myself too much. I would say God's faithful. And you can trust him, and that, really love the people in your life. Like every moment of every second. And that, oh, I got a good one for you. In fact, I was thinking about this yesterday. I'm actually glad you said that. That this is what I would tell people. Some people, a lot of ministers are more in love with ministry than they are with Jesus. And I was one of those. I was probably more in love with ministry and being a successful minister and writer than I was actually Jesus. And at some point, Jesus became so real to me that I don't care about all that anymore. It's all about intimacy with him. And that's what I want. I want intimacy with Jesus. And when that becomes the purpose, out of that intimacy, that's where everything else really births. That's where the anointing comes from. And that's what I pray for every day. I want the anointing on my writing and what I do. But it comes out of intimacy.
Yeah.
It's not about, I love the church. I love the church and I love ministry. But if we're not in that intimate relationship with God, it's really about eternity. I mean, we're passing through this thing.
Yeah.
And it's falling in love with Jesus and understanding the reality of his presence in everything.
Yeah.
And letting ministry and life come out of that. My prayer is wash me, cleanse me, love through me in everything I do. Love my wife, love on my writing, when I'm speaking, whatever I do, I want him to come through me. It's so funny. I used to want to speak. I used to want to write. And now it's like, just let God do it through me.
Yeah.
I could care less if my name's on the book. And now he's released me. But that would be a big thing.
Yeah.
You know, just that intimacy with Jesus. That's the key.
You know, Max, as people are listening to this right now, I know there's people out there, I'm just feeling the Holy Spirit say this, that there's people that want to know what that intimacy with God is like and what that means. Could you pray for somebody that feels that way right now and just release an understanding of that intimacy for them? Just intercede to the Lord for them.
Father, right now, I just, Lord, we know that you're real, you're alive, and you're fully present. You know, Tim Clinton told me something the other day. He said, so many of the men that come to the conferences, they're religious, they love God, they go to church, but they don't really believe it in their heart of hearts. Lord, I pray that people know that you are really risen. You are risen. And if you're risen, that means you're fully present. And you hear us just like you hear the disciples. And that was the whole thing about the Josiah word, is that you are fully present. and you see us when we pray. And Father, I just pray that we learn to enter into his presence in awareness of his presence. Live in an awareness of his presence. Father, I just pray that you just draw people to you. Your word says that if we seek you with all our heart, that we'll find you. There's something about blocking everything out and just seeking you, just crying out, just pouring our souls out to God, that you will show up. You show up in very personal, real ways, in different ways to people. But we know it's not based on a feeling. It's based on your word. It's based on your promises. You're fully present because you said you're fully present and because you're risen from the dead. And we either believe it or we don't. Paul said, if you're not risen, then I'm to be pitied among all men. I've wasted my life if you're not risen. But if you are risen, it changes everything. How does it change everything? It changes everything because you're fully present. If you rose from the dead, you are fully present, whether we feel it or not. And it's up to us to believe and to trust in that. And if not, well, then we're just wasting our lives. But we know that you're risen because of the facts, because of the evidence, and because of your word. And we just trust you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Max, thank you so much for praying for the listeners here and for sharing all those stories of how God has met you along the way. I just want to encourage everybody that's listening right now that if you want to learn more about Max, you can go to his website, maxdavisbooks.com, and you can stay up to date with all of his writings that way. Max, is there anything else that you'd like to tell people how to get a hold of you?
Well, they can just Google Max Davis author. That brings up everything.
So, Max, thank you so much for just spending some time with me. I love hearing these stories. We're going to have to definitely stay in touch. I know you've got a lot more stories, and just have to figure out some more time to share that. But I want to thank you for allowing me to join you along your way. I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Max. I'll be providing his info in the show notes. Thank you for listening to Along the Way. If you've enjoyed joining me along my way, please share this with a friend who you think will be encouraged by this podcast. Also, please rate and review Along the Way on iTunes. That helps more people discover Along the Way. And subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and through my website, alongtheway.media. I hope that you've enjoyed this part of my journey, and may you realize when Jesus is walking with you along your way. Along the Way is honored to be part of the Charisma Podcast Network. You can find tons of spirit-filled content from their vast catalog of podcasts, including my Monday through Friday news stories for the Charisma News Podcast. Go to cpnshows.com to see the full list and latest episodes.